London, April 1815. The narrow streets of Whitechapel reeked of refuse and desperation, a world away from the perfumed drawing rooms of Mayfair, where fortunes were decided over tea and scandal. In a cramped lodging house on Crooked Lane, Miss Imogen Carstairs stood frozen before the cracked mirror, her hands trembling as her mother fastened the last buttons of her threadbare travelling dress. "You will thank me for this someday," Mrs. Carstairs said, her voice devoid of maternal warmth, counting the £30 that lay on the scarred table, the price agreed upon with Mrs. Wickham's establishment. Imogen's reflection stared back at her, green eyes wide with the kind of terror that comes from understanding exactly what is about to happen and being powerless to prevent it. The sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones outside the window marked the arrival of her fate. Mrs. Wickham's man had come to collect his purchase. If stories of courage in the face of impossible odds move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. What happens next will change everything you thought you knew about rescue and redemption. The carriage that waited in the pre-dawn mist bore no family crest, nothing to identify its purpose or destination. Imogen descended the narrow stairs of the lodging house, each step feeling like a small death, while her mother followed behind with remarkable composure for a woman who had just sold her only daughter into the most notorious brothel in London. Mrs. Wickham's establishment was infamous throughout the city, a place where young women entered and rarely emerged intact, if they emerged at all. The proprietress specialized in what she called training, a euphemism that made even hardened men of the ton speak in hushed voices when the subject arose at their clubs. Imogen knew these facts with the clarity of someone who had listened to whispered warnings throughout her childhood, never imagining they might one day apply to her own life. "Mrs. Wickham pays well for girls with your particular qualities," her mother had explained 3 days prior, when poverty had finally exhausted whatever maternal instinct remained. "Your father left us nothing but debts when he died. You are 19 years old with no prospects, no dowry and no future. At least this way you will be useful." The driver, a brutish man with dead eyes, opened the carriage door. Imogen paused at the threshold, turning back to her mother one final time. "Please," she whispered, hating the weakness in her own voice, "there must be another way." "There is no other way," Mrs. Carstairs replied, her face as hard as the cobblestones beneath their feet. "We are 3 months behind on rent. They will cast us both into the streets by week's end. This is survival, Imogen. Practical, necessary survival." Imogen climbed into the dark interior of the carriage, the door closing behind her with the finality of a coffin lid. Through the small window, she watched her mother count the money once more before turning back into the lodging house, without a backward glance. The carriage lurched forward, wheels clattering over uneven stones, carrying her toward a fate she could scarcely bear to contemplate. The streets of Whitechapel passed in a blur of grey morning light. Shops not yet open, coal smoke beginning to rise from chimneys, the occasional figure hurrying through the cold. Imogen pressed her forehead against the cold glass, willing herself not to weep, not to scream, not to betray the terror that threatened to consume her entirely. She had been raised a gentleman's daughter, however fallen their circumstances had become. She would face this with whatever dignity remained to her. It was then that the impossible happened. The carriage jerked to an abrupt halt, throwing Imogen forward against the opposite seat. Voices erupted outside, the driver's rough protests met by commands delivered in a tone that brooked no argument. The door flew open, and Imogen found herself staring at a man who seemed conjured from the pages of a novel. Tall, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, with black hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. For a fraction of a second, as he met the terrified eyes of the girl before him, his expression wavered. The same shadow of dread he had seen in his own sister's eyes 5 years before stared back at him now, and his countenance hardened with icy determination. "Miss," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable accent of the highest aristocracy. "I am Lucian Devereux, Duke of Wycliffe. You will come with me. Now." Behind him, another gentleman held the driver at bay, one hand resting casually on the head of a formidable walking cane. Imogen's mind struggled to comprehend what was occurring. Dukes did not appear in Whitechapel at dawn. Dukes did not rescue girls from brothel-bound carriages. Yet here stood a man who could be nothing else, extending his hand toward her with absolute authority. I do not understand, Imogen managed, though her body was already moving, already reaching for his offered hand as if it were the only solid thing in a world gone mad. Understanding can wait, the Duke replied. Mrs. Wickham's establishments are no place for any woman, let alone one barely out of the schoolroom. Come. His hand closed around hers, strong and warm through her worn gloves, and Imogen found herself lifted from the carriage with surprising gentleness. The other gentleman, whom the Duke addressed as Nathaniel, kept the driver occupied while a third man, clearly a servant of far higher quality than Mrs. Wickham's employee, took charge of a magnificent black curricle that waited nearby. Your Grace, the driver protested, recognition finally dawning. Mrs. Wickham paid good money for that girl. The mother signed papers. Then Mrs. Wickham may apply to me for reimbursement, the Duke said, his voice dropping to a temperature that made even Imogen shiver. I believe she will find the sum of £30 insufficient motivation to challenge a peer of the realm, particularly when that peer happens to know certain facts about her establishment that the magistrates would find most interesting. The driver paled and stepped back. Within moments, Imogen found herself seated in the Duke's curricle, a laprobe tucked around her despite the fact she still wore her traveling dress. The vehicle moved forward with smooth precision, leaving Whitechapel and its horrors behind. How did you know? Imogen asked when she could finally speak. How did you happen to be there at that exact moment? The Duke's companion, Viscount Nathaniel Ashby, as he introduced himself, settled into the opposite seat with a wry smile. His Grace has made it a personal mission to intercept Mrs. Wickham's procurement methods. We maintain contacts throughout the city, who alert us when transactions of this nature are scheduled. 5 years ago, the Duke said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, my youngest sister was nearly sold to the same establishment by her governess. We rescued her in time, but the experience left its mark. I vowed then that no other woman would suffer that fate, if I could prevent it. The words should have reassured Imogen. Instead, they raised 100 new questions, each more troubling than the last. She had been rescued, yes, but rescued into what? She sat in a curricle with one of England's most eligible bachelors, a man she had never met, traveling toward an unknown destination. Her mother had the legal right to determine her fate until she reached her majority or married. The Duke had committed what could technically be considered abduction, regardless of his noble intentions. Where are you taking me? She asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. My townhouse in Grosvenor Square, the Duke replied. You will be safe there. My grandmother, the Dowager Duchess Augusta, resides with me. Her presence will ensure your reputation remains intact. Before Imogen could respond, they arrived at an address that made her breath catch. The townhouse stood 4 stories high, its facade gleaming white in the growing morning light, windows reflecting the pale sky like a series of watching eyes. Servants appeared as if summoned by magic, taking charge of the curricle, opening doors, ushering them inside with the practiced efficiency of a great household. The silence of the entrance hall was what stunned Imogen first, a silence so profound that the sound of her own hesitant footsteps on the polished marble rang out like a sacrilege. Her eyes followed the curve of a staircase that seemed to ascend to heaven itself, passing portraits of ancestors whose velvet and silk gazes judged her for her mere presence. The air smelled of beeswax and money, scents so foreign to her Whitechapel existence that they made her dizzy. Every surface gleamed with care, every object spoke of wealth accumulated over generations. She stood frozen, acutely aware of her shabby dress, her worn boots, the stark contrast between her poverty and this extraordinary abundance. Lucian Devereux, a voice rang out from the top of the stairs, imperious and sharp as a blade. What fresh madness is this? An elderly woman descended with remarkable grace, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her morning dress of lavender silk speaking of wealth and impeccable taste. Dowager Duchess Augusta of Wycliffe surveyed the scene before her with eyes that missed nothing, her grandson Viscount Ashby and the bedraggled girl standing in her entrance hall. Grandmother, the Duke said with a slight bow, may I present Miss Imogen Carstairs? She requires our protection and assistance. I trust you will extend your hospitality. the Dowager's gaze fixed on Imogen with an intensity that made her want to shrink into the floor. Those sharp eyes catalogued every detail, the quality of her dress, the color of her hair, the way she stood despite her obvious distress. A long moment passed before the Dowager spoke. "Carstairs," she repeated thoughtfully. "Daughter of George Carstairs, the clerk." "Yes, Your Grace," Imogen replied, managing a curtsy despite her trembling legs. "My father died 18 months ago, leaving you in the care of that grasping woman who calls herself your mother, I presume." The Dowager descended the final stairs, circling Imogen like a general inspecting troops. "You have good bones, excellent posture despite your circumstances. Your eyes are quite remarkable, Devereux green almost. Your hair wants proper dressing, your gown wants burning, but the raw material—" She paused, turning to her grandson. "What precisely do you propose to do with her, Lucien?" It was a question Imogen desperately wanted answered. The Duke exchanged a glance with Viscount Ashby before responding. "I propose," he said slowly, each word chosen with care, "that we offer Miss Carstairs an unusual opportunity, one that might benefit us both." The Dowager's eyebrows rose with interest. "Continue." "You have been pressing me to marry for the past 3 seasons, grandmother. You have a particular candidate in mind, Lady Arabella Thornfield, I believe. You arrange opportunities for us to meet. You drop unsubtle hints about suitable brides. You make my life generally intolerable on the subject." "Lady Arabella is perfection itself," the Dowager declared. "Beautiful, accomplished, from an impeccable family." "And utterly unsuitable for me in every way that matters," the Duke interrupted. "However, I understand your concerns about the succession, about my responsibilities. What if I were to become engaged? Would that satisfy your demands for matrimony?" The Dowager's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Engaged to whom?" The Duke turned to Imogen, and in that moment she understood with startling clarity what he was about to propose. The impossibility of it, the audacity, the sheer madness, all of it crystallized in the space of a heartbeat. "To Miss Carstairs," he said calmly, "for a period of 3 months. During that time, grandmother, you would have the opportunity to train her in all the accomplishments required of a duchess. If, at the end of 3 months, she meets your exacting standards and wishes to proceed with an actual marriage, we would do so. If not, the engagement would be dissolved quietly, and Miss Carstairs would receive a generous dowry to establish herself respectably elsewhere." The silence that followed this pronouncement stretched until Imogen thought she might scream. The Dowager stared at her grandson as if he had suggested dancing naked through Hyde Park. Viscount Ashby studied the ceiling with sudden fascination. Imogen herself could not seem to draw sufficient breath. "You are proposing," the Dowager said at last, her voice dangerously quiet, "to pass off this girl, this clerk's daughter rescued from God knows what fate, as your fiancée, to present her to society, to have me, Augusta Devereux, transform her into Duchess material in a mere 3 months? Precisely," the Duke confirmed. "It is the most ridiculous scheme I have ever heard." The Dowager circled Imogen once more, her expression unreadable. "It will create a scandal of extraordinary proportions. Every gossip in London will tear the girl to shreds. Lady Arabella's family will be mortally offended. The ton will laugh themselves sick at the notion of a duke marrying so far beneath his station." "Yes," the Duke agreed, "all of those things are likely." The Dowager stopped directly in front of Imogen. "What say you, girl? Do you understand what he is offering? 3 months of the most intense education you can imagine. I will work you until you weep. I will remake you from the skin out. You will learn to walk, speak, dress, dance, and conduct yourself as if you were born to be a duchess. And at the end of it, you will either marry one of England's premier peers, or you will walk away with enough money to live independently and respectably for the rest of your life." Imogen's mind raced. Hours ago, she had been in a carriage bound for horror. Now she stood in the entrance hall of a ducal townhouse, being offered a bargain that seemed plucked from the pages of a fairy tale, albeit one with decidedly practical terms. The Duke watched her with those storm-grey eyes, waiting, while his grandmother radiated skeptical challenge. "What is the alternative?" Imogen asked quietly. "If I refuse?" "The Duke will provide you with funds to establish yourself modestly," the Dowager replied, "perhaps as a governess or companion. Your mother retains legal authority over you until you reach your majority, however, which presents certain complications." The unspoken truth hung in the air. Her mother could sell her again, could reclaim her, could drag her back to Whitechapel and worse. Unless Imogen had the protection of a powerful family or the independence of marriage, she remained vulnerable. "Why?" Imogen turned to the Duke, needing to understand. "Why would you do this for a stranger? What do you gain?" For the first time since their meeting, something flickered across the Duke's controlled features, something that might have been pain or memory or both. "My sister was your age when her governess betrayed her. I failed to protect her soon enough. She survived, but the experience changed her in ways that haunt me still. If I can prevent even one woman from suffering such a fate, if I can turn my grandmother's matrimonial ambitions towards something productive..." He paused. "Besides, I find myself curious to see if it can be done. If a clerk's daughter can become indistinguishable from any lady of the ton." "It is a wager," Imogen said, understanding fully now. "I am your wager against society's expectations." "More than that," the Dowager interjected, a strange gleam entering her eyes. "You are my opportunity to prove that true quality is created through education and discipline, not merely inherited. If I can transform you, I will have demonstrated something the ton has denied for centuries, that nobility of manner can be learned, that grace is not solely the province of those born to it." It was vanity speaking, Imogen realized, the Dowager's famous pride, her reputation as an arbiter of taste and propriety, the challenge of taking rough material and polishing it to shine as brightly as any diamond. The prospect had caught her imagination despite herself. 3 months, Imogen said slowly, "and if I fail your training, I still receive the dowry." "You have my word," the Duke replied. "Additionally, your mother will be compensated for her cooperation. She will sign papers relinquishing all claim to you, witnessed by my solicitors. You will be legally free of her regardless of the outcome." It was an escape, a genuine, miraculous escape from a fate too horrible to contemplate. True, she would be trading one form of obligation for another, submitting to the Dowager's notorious strictness, playing the role of fiancée to a man she did not know. But she would be safe. She would be learning. She would have a future beyond the walls of Mrs. Wickham's establishment. "I accept," Imogen said, lifting her chin with a confidence she did not entirely feel. "I will do everything in my power to meet your standards, Your Grace, and at the end of 3 months we will see what has become of your wager." The Dowager's smile was sharp and satisfied. "So be it. We begin immediately. Lucian, have Miss Carstairs' belongings sent over from Whitechapel." "There are no belongings, grandmother," the Duke said quietly. "What she wears is all she possesses." Something flickered across the Dowager's face. Pity, perhaps, or recognition of the depths from which this girl had come. She nodded curtly. "Then we shall start with the basics. Come, Miss Carstairs. The first lesson begins now." The days that followed blurred into an exhausting whirlwind of transformation. The Dowager proved as demanding as promised, beginning each morning at 6 o'clock with posture exercises that left Imogen's back and shoulders aching. She learned to walk with books balanced on her head, to sit without leaning against the chair back, to rise and curtsy with fluid grace rather than the jerky movements of someone unused to formal manners. Imogen discovered that elegance was a constant ache, in the back muscles forced into unnatural straightness, in feet squeezed into dancing slippers that pinched with every step, in the suffocating sensation of a tightly laced corset that restricted each breath. For the first time, she felt the texture of silk against her skin, a cold, smooth whisper that seemed to belong to another woman, to a stranger she watched slowly forming in the mirror, someone who moved with practiced grace, whose hands no longer bore the rough marks of poverty, whose very posture announced breeding she had never possessed. "A duchess," the Dowager declared repeatedly, "is always conscious of her body, her carriage, her presentation. You must appear as though being perfectly correct comes naturally, as though you were born knowing how to comport yourself with elegance." Language lessons occupied the afternoons. Imogen discovered she had a facility for French, picking up pronunciation with surprising ease, though Italian proved more challenging. The dowager hired masters for music, pianoforte, harp, singing, and Imogen threw herself into the instruction with desperate determination. She had no intention of failing. Failure meant losing this miraculous second chance. The Duke himself appeared infrequently during those early weeks. He attended to business, maintained his social obligations, and otherwise gave Imogen space to work with his grandmother. When they did encounter each other, passing in corridors, at breakfast, during carefully chaperoned afternoon visits, he maintained perfect courtesy, asking about her progress, offering encouragement, but never overstepping the bounds of their unusual arrangement. "Do not mistake his distance for indifference," Viscount Ashby told her one afternoon as they walked in the townhouse's small garden. The Viscount had become an unexpected ally, helping Imogen navigate the complex social waters she was learning to swim. "Lucian is being careful. He knows the Tun will scrutinize every interaction between you. If he appears too attentive, they will cry fortune hunter. Too distant, and they will question the validity of the engagement." "Does he regret it?" Imogen asked. "Rescuing me? Proposing this arrangement?" "On the contrary," Nathaniel replied. "I have known Lucian since we were children. I have never seen him as purposeful as he has been these past weeks. I believe you have given him something he has lacked, a mission that engages both his heart and his mind." The words stayed with Imogen as she continued her transformation. The dowager ordered an entire wardrobe from London's finest modistes: morning dresses, afternoon dresses, evening gowns, walking dresses, riding habits. Each fitting became another lesson in deportment, in standing still while others worked, in making decisions about fabric and trim with the confidence of someone who had worn fine things all her life. "You favor green," the dowager observed during one such fitting. "Wise. It complements your eyes remarkably. Avoid pink, it washes you out. Ivory rather than white for evening. Remember, you are not a debutante. You are a woman of substance and maturity." By the 6th week, Imogen barely recognized herself in the mirror. Her hair had been cut and dressed in the latest fashion, her posture had transformed, and the constant lessons had refined her speech until only the most discerning ear might detect her origins. The dowager began introducing her to carefully selected members of society, ladies known for discretion, gentlemen who could be trusted not to interrogate too aggressively. At one such gathering, a musical afternoon at Lady Pembroke's, Imogen noticed a young woman standing alone near the terrace doors. The girl could not have been more than 17, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her fan, her eyes darting nervously as two older ladies nearby exchanged glances and whispered behind their hands. Imogen recognized that particular brand of terror, the fear of being observed, judged, and found wanting. She had worn that same expression mere weeks ago. Without conscious thought, Imogen crossed to the young woman's side. "What a lovely fan," she said warmly, gesturing to the delicate ivory piece. "The painting is exquisite. Is it Italian?" The girl's eyes widened with surprise and relief. "French, actually. It was my grandmother's. Then you must treasure it doubly, for its beauty and its sentiment." Imogen smiled with genuine kindness. "This is your first season, I imagine. Mine as well, in a manner of speaking. Terrifying, is it not?" A small laugh escaped the girl. "I thought I was the only one frightened. We all are, I suspect. We simply become better at hiding it." Imogen spent the next quarter hour in easy conversation with the young Miss Fairfax, learning of her love of poetry and her anxiety about the upcoming season, offering gentle encouragement and genuine interest. Across the room, Viscount Ashby observed the interaction with interest before murmuring to the Duke, "Your fiancée possesses a quality no amount of instruction can instill. That compassion is entirely her own." Lucian's gaze followed Imogen as she drew the shy girl into conversation with two other guests, creating a small circle of warmth in what had been isolation. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is one of many reasons I find myself remarkably fortunate." The dowager, observing from the opposite side of the room with her characteristic hawk-like attention, allowed herself the rarest of expressions, an almost imperceptible nod of approval. Instinct, she knew, could not be taught, One either possessed natural grace of spirit, or one did not. The girl had a good heart. It was a solid foundation. Everything else was merely polish. The official announcement, the Dowager explained afterward, clearly pleased with Imogen's instinctive kindness, will come at the Worthington Ball in 2 weeks. Lord and Lady Worthington are old friends. Their ball will provide the perfect venue for your debut as Lucian's intended. Until then, we build anticipation. We allow rumors to circulate. We create curiosity. It was during one of these preparatory social events that Imogen first encountered Lady Arabella Thornfield. The musical evening at Lady Pembroke's residence had seemed innocuous enough. The Dowager had deemed Imogen ready for such gatherings, small affairs where 30 or 40 people assembled to hear accomplished musicians perform, to take light refreshments, to engage in the endless social dance of the ton. Imogen wore a new gown of emerald silk, her hair dressed with small pearls, and she felt almost confident as she entered Lady Pembroke's drawing room on the Duke's arm. The room fell silent for a moment, that telltale pause when something unexpected occurs. Eyes turned toward them, speculation written clearly on dozens of faces. The Duke seemed utterly unperturbed, guiding Imogen through the crowd with the easy assurance of a man entirely comfortable in his position. "Your Grace," Lady Pembroke greeted them warmly. "How delightful to see you. And this must be the young lady everyone is whispering about. May I present Miss Imogen Carstairs," the Duke said smoothly. "My fiancée." The official designation, spoken aloud for the first time in such company, sent visible shock rippling through the assembled guests. Imogen maintained her composure, executing the perfect curtsy the Dowager had drilled into her, meeting Lady Pembroke's surprised gaze with quiet confidence. "How extraordinary," Lady Pembroke managed, recovering her poise. "Congratulations, Your Grace. Miss Carstairs, welcome." It was then that Imogen saw her, a vision in rose silk, blonde curls perfectly arranged, blue eyes wide with what appeared to be genuine distress. Lady Arabella Thornfield stood near the pianoforte, one hand pressed to her heart, as if physically wounded by the announcement she had just heard. "Excuse me," Lady Arabella murmured to her companion before making her way directly toward them, propriety demanding she acknowledge the Duke, despite whatever personal feelings she harbored. "Your Grace," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I had heard rumors, but I confess I did not believe them. You are truly engaged." "Indeed, Lady Arabella," the Duke replied, his tone perfectly courteous but cool. "Miss Carstairs has done me the great honor of accepting my proposal." Lady Arabella's gaze turned to Imogen, and for a moment something raw and unguarded flashed across her beautiful features. Then the mask of breeding reasserted itself. "How lovely for you both. I was not aware Your Grace was even acquainted with Miss Carstairs, was it?" "Our acquaintance, while recent, has been deeply meaningful," the Duke said, a subtle warning in his tone that only a fool would ignore. Lady Arabella was no fool. She curtsied gracefully, offered congratulations that rang hollow, and withdrew to a corner where her mother waited like a spider in silk. Imogen watched them confer in urgent whispers, seeing how the mother's face darkened with fury, while the daughter maintained her public composure. "They will be trouble," Viscount Ashby murmured at Imogen's elbow. Lady Thornfield had already ordered her daughter's wedding clothes. She considered Lucian as good as secured. The evening proceeded with careful awkwardness. Imogen performed her role flawlessly, answering questions about her background with the carefully crafted story they had prepared, demonstrating her newly acquired accomplishments when invited to play the pianoforte, maintaining appropriate proximity to the Duke without appearing overly familiar. During a conversation near the pianoforte, Lady Caroline Thornfield, Lady Arabella's mother, approached with the predatory smile of someone setting a trap. "Miss Carstairs, how delightful. Tell me, have you had the opportunity to attend the new production of Le Noce de Figaro at the King's Theatre? Everyone speaks of nothing else." It was an obvious snare. The opera had opened only the previous week, and Lady Caroline clearly expected to expose a gap in Imogen's education, to reveal her as an imposter, attempting to navigate waters far beyond her depth. Imogen met the woman's gaze with calm composure. "I have not yet had that pleasure, Lady Caroline. However, my late father, being a man of considerable learning, often said that the true soul of any story lies not in the grandeur of its staging, but in the honesty of human emotion it portrays. Music may be divine, but if it fails to make us feel something genuine, it becomes merely beautiful sound, admirable but ultimately hollow. The philosophical response, intelligent and thoughtful, came from Imogen's own experience rather than the dowager's instruction. It deflected the trap, while demonstrating a depth of thought that transcended mere social polish. Lady Caroline's smile faltered slightly as she realized her quarry had escaped. "How very provincial," she managed, though the criticism rang hollow. "How very wise," corrected an elderly gentleman standing nearby, Lord Pembroke himself. "Your father sounds as though he was a gentleman of true education, Miss Carstairs, the sort becoming rare in our modern age." By the time they departed, Imogen felt as though she had navigated a battlefield armed only with good manners and expensive silk, and emerged victorious. "You did well," the Duke told her during the carriage ride home. "Better than well. You were entirely credible." "Lady Arabella hates me," Imogen observed. "Lady Arabella is accustomed to getting what she wants. She will recover." The Duke fell silent for a moment before continuing. "I should perhaps apologize. I have made you the target of considerable hostility by involving you in this scheme." "You rescued me from a fate immeasurably worse," Imogen replied. "Whatever hostility the Tun directs toward me is preferable to the alternative. Besides," she added with a slight smile, "I find I rather enjoy proving I belong where everyone assumes I do not." The Duke laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and pleasure. "My grandmother has trained you too well. That is precisely the sort of confidence required to navigate these waters." Their eyes met in the dim interior of the carriage, and something shifted in that moment, something Imogen could not quite name, but felt nonetheless. It was no longer the admiration of teacher for student, nor pride in a project successfully executed. For the first time, Lucian realized he was simply enjoying her company. Her intelligence amused him, her courage inspired him, her resilience humbled him. He was no longer looking at a protégé but at an equal, and that recognition was both thrilling and dangerous in ways he had not anticipated. The Duke looked away first, his expression becoming shuttered once more, and they completed the journey in silence that felt somehow more intimate than conversation. The Worthington ball arrived with the inexorable force of destiny. Imogen dressed with the dowager's assistance, donning a gown of deep emerald green that made her eyes luminous, her hair arranged in an elaborate style that had taken her maid 2 hours to achieve. When she descended to the entrance hall where the Duke waited, his expression of stunned appreciation told her more than words ever could. "Miss Carstairs," he said formally, offering his arm, "you are magnificent." The ballroom at Worthington House blazed with candlelight, hundreds of guests milling in their finest attire, music already playing as couples took to the floor. The formal announcement came shortly after their arrival, Lord Worthington calling for attention, declaring his pleasure in announcing the engagement of His Grace the Duke of Wycliffe to Miss Imogen Carstairs. The response was everything the Dowager had predicted and prepared Imogen for: applause that rang hollow in places, whispers that rose like a tide. Ladies studying Imogen through opera glasses, cataloguing every detail for later dissection. Gentlemen regarding the Duke with expressions ranging from confusion to poorly concealed amusement. "Let them stare," the Duke murmured as he led Imogen onto the floor for the first waltz. "They will grow accustomed to you soon enough." Dancing with him proved different from the lessons with masters the Dowager had hired. The Duke's hand at her waist felt warm even through layers of silk and propriety. He moved with effortless grace, guiding her through the steps while maintaining appropriate distance, his attention focused entirely on her, despite the hundreds of eyes watching their every movement. "Are you frightened?" he asked quietly. "Terrified," Imogen admitted, "but also strangely exhilarated." "Is that peculiar?" "Not at all. You are discovering your own strength. That is always exhilarating, even when it is also terrifying." The waltz ended too soon and too late. Imogen found herself immediately surrounded by curious guests, enduring questions and scrutiny with the poise the Dowager had instilled. Gentlemen requested dances, which she accepted with appropriate modesty. Ladies engaged her in conversation designed to trap her in some error of knowledge or manners, but the dowager's training held firm. It was during one such conversation, near the refreshment table, that disaster struck from an unexpected direction. A woman of middle years, wearing a gown that had seen better days, pushed through the crowd with the desperation of someone who had nothing left to lose. Her entry into the ballroom had likely been accomplished by bribing a footman or following the delivery of supplies through the servants' entrance, the sort of brazen infiltration possible only when desperation overwhelmed all sense of propriety. Imogen recognized her mother half a second before Mrs. Carstairs seized her arm in a grip, painful even through long gloves. "There you are," Mrs. Carstairs declared loudly, her voice cutting through the genteel murmur of the ball. "Playing Duchess, are you? While your own mother starves in Whitechapel." The surrounding conversations died immediately. Every eye in the vicinity turned toward the scene unfolding near the refreshment table. Imogen felt her carefully constructed composure fracture, felt the world she had been building for 2 months threaten to collapse around her. "Mother," she said quietly, desperately, "you were compensated. The Duke's solicitors—" £30? Mrs. Carstairs laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "What is £30 when you are swanning about in silk and emeralds, engaged to one of England's richest peers? I carried you for 9 months, I raised you, and this is how you repay me? By abandoning your family." The Duke materialized at Imogen's side with the speed of divine intervention. "Mrs. Carstairs," he said, his voice cold as winter frost, "you were provided with adequate compensation for relinquishing your legal claim to your daughter. That contract, signed and witnessed, stipulated you would not contact Miss Carstairs again under any circumstances. You are now in violation of that agreement." "Contract be damned," Mrs. Carstairs spat. "I am her mother, I have rights." "You sold those rights for £30, the Duke interrupted, his tone slicing through her protests. "You attempted to deliver your daughter to a brothel. You forfeited any claim to maternal concern the moment you signed those papers. Now you will leave quietly, or I will have you removed and prosecuted for trespass, harassment, and breach of contract. The choice is entirely yours." 2 footmen appeared as if summoned, their presence making the threat entirely credible. Mrs. Carstairs looked between the Duke and her daughter, seemed to calculate her odds, and finally recognized the futility of her position. With a final venomous glare at Imogen, she allowed herself to be escorted from the ballroom. The silence that followed her departure felt suffocating. Imogen stood frozen, acutely aware of every eye upon her, every mind processing what they had just witnessed. Her origins, her poverty, the ugliness of her past, all of it exposed in the most public venue imaginable. Lady Arabella's voice carried clearly from nearby. "Well, that certainly explains the hasty engagement. One can hardly blame His Grace for acting out of pity." The Duke, who had been preparing to escort Imogen from the ballroom, paused. He did not turn fully toward Lady Arabella, but rather addressed the group surrounding her, his voice not raised yet cutting through the silence with glacial precision. "Pity, Lady Arabella?" he said, each word carefully measured. "That is a sentiment I reserve for those incapable of recognizing strength and integrity when standing before them. Miss Carstairs requires no one's pity, only the respect her character demands, something which this evening she has demonstrated in abundance." He turned back to Imogen, offered his arm with deliberate courtesy, and guided her from the ballroom. The comment resonated through the assembled guests, shaming those who had heard it into uncomfortable silence. It was the Dowager who broke the moment as they reached the entrance hall. She swept forward with all the authority of her 70 years and impeccable lineage, her voice carrying back into the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice brooking no argument, "you have just witnessed an unfortunate woman's attempt to extort money from her betters through emotional manipulation. Miss Carstairs has shown remarkable fortitude in rising above such sordid origins. I, Augusta Devereux, Dowager Duchess of Wycliffe, personally vouch for her character, her accomplishments, and her suitability to become my grandson's wife. Those who question my judgment are welcome to discuss it with me, privately." The last word carried enough threat to silence even the boldest gossip, The Dowager extended her arm to Imogen with the clear expectation of obedience. Imogen took it, allowing herself to be guided from the ballroom with as much dignity as she could muster, the Duke following close behind. They departed the ball early, the carriage ride home passing in weighted silence. Once inside the townhouse, Imogen finally allowed her composure to break. She sank onto a chair in the drawing room, her hands trembling so badly she could barely unfasten her wrap. "I have destroyed everything," she whispered. "The entire ton witnessed that spectacle. By tomorrow, every scandal sheet in London will carry the story." "Yes," the Dowager agreed, settling into her customary chair with unruffled calm. "They will. The question becomes how we respond." "There is no response," Imogen said bitterly. "The damage is done. Your wager has failed, Your Grace. I cannot possibly proceed with this engagement after tonight." "Cannot?" The Duke had been standing by the fireplace, but now he moved to kneel before Imogen's chair, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Or will not. There is a difference, Miss Carstairs." "They all know," Imogen said, fighting tears. "They know what I am, where I came from, what my own mother tried to do to me. How can I possibly face society after this?" "By continuing to hold your head high," the Duke replied. "By refusing to be ashamed of circumstances beyond your control. Your mother's actions speak to her character, not yours. Anyone with sense will recognize that distinction." "The ton is not known for sense," Viscount Ashby observed from the doorway, where he had followed them inside. "However, they are known for following strong leadership. If the Devereux family stands united in support of Miss Carstairs, if we make it clear that we find her entirely acceptable despite her origins, many will fall in line. Others will gossip, yes, but they would gossip regardless. Such is the nature of society." "I will not have you damage your reputation further for my sake," Imogen protested. "My dear child," the Dowager said with unexpected gentleness, "my reputation is unassailable. As for Lucien, he has spent his entire adult life being precisely the sort of Duke society expects. Responsible, proper, dutiful. Perhaps it is time he did something unexpected. Perhaps you are exactly the sort of unexpected he needs." The Duke's hand covered Imogen's where it rested on the chair arm. "We continue as planned. You have worked too hard, come too far to abandon the endeavor now. Unless—" He paused, his grey eyes searching her face. "Unless you truly wish to withdraw. In which case, the terms of our arrangement stand. You will receive the promised dowry and be free to establish yourself elsewhere. The choice is yours, Miss Carstairs. It has always been yours." Imogen looked at the three faces surrounding her, the Dowager's proud determination, Viscount Ashby's loyal support, and the Duke's steady regard. They were offering her something she had never expected to find in the wake of her rescue: genuine care, authentic concern, real choice. "I would like," she said slowly, "to continue, if you will have me." The Duke's smile transformed his usually austere features into something breathtakingly handsome. "Then we shall weather this storm together, Miss Carstairs, and emerge stronger for it." The days following the Worthington Ball proved as difficult as anticipated. Scandal sheets published lurid accounts of the incident, embellishing details with creative abandon. Invitations that had been arriving steadily slowed to a trickle. Ladies who had been cautiously welcoming turned cold shoulders. The ton, it seemed, had judged Imogen and found her wanting. At White's, Viscount Ashby found himself surrounded by a group of gentlemen who spoke with the casual cruelty characteristic of men who believed themselves untouchable. "Heard Wycliffe rescued the girl from a brothel-bound carriage," Lord Pemberton's son remarked with a laugh. "Rather theatrical even for him. One wonders if it was truly rescue or merely acquiring damaged goods at a discount." The group laughed, unaware that Nathaniel stood just behind them, his expression darkening with each word. "Curious," Nathaniel said, his voice cutting through the laughter with the precision of a surgeon's blade. The men turned, suddenly aware of his presence. Some men measure their worth by the blood they inherited from ancestors they never met. Others measure it by the courage of their own actions. Wycliffe has always preferred the latter. He did not rescue a damsel in distress. He recognized a soul of steel wrapped in circumstances beyond her control. I suggest you not confuse the two things, gentlemen. History tends to remember acts of genuine valor far longer than it remembers the petty mockery of those too timid to act themselves. The silence that followed was profound. Nathaniel held each man's gaze until they looked away, then departed with the satisfaction of knowing he had drawn first blood in the battle for public opinion. Yet the Devereux family held firm, despite such encounters. The Duke appeared in public with Imogen regularly, his manner toward her unchanged by the scandal. The Dowager maintained her rigorous training schedule, refusing to acknowledge any setback. Viscount Ashby remained a steadfast presence, deflecting criticism with his characteristic wit. "Let them whisper," he told Imogen during one particularly difficult afternoon. "Whispers fade, but your accomplishments, your character, those endure." The turning point came 3 weeks after the disastrous ball, at an event Imogen had not anticipated attending. The Prince Regent himself summoned the Duke to Carlton House for an evening reception, and protocol demanded he bring his intended bride. "Prinny is notoriously unpredictable," the Dowager warned as she oversaw Imogen's preparation. "He may be charming or cutting, supportive or scandalous. You must be prepared for anything." Carlton House dazzled beyond imagination. Gilt everywhere, paintings by masters covering the walls, furnishings that represented the height of opulent taste. The Prince Regent held court in a reception room that seemed designed to overwhelm lesser mortals, surrounded by his favorites and those seeking favor. "Wycliffe," the Prince called out upon spotting them. "And this must be the young lady causing such a stir. Come, come, let me see her properly." The Duke presented Imogen with perfect formality. She executed her deepest curtsy, then rose to face the Prince's appraising stare. He circled her slowly, rather like the Dowager had that first day, studying her with eyes that missed nothing despite his notorious dissolution. "Carstairs," the Prince mused. "Clark's daughter, I understand. Mother tried to sell her to a brothel. Rather dramatic origins for a future Duchess." "Your Majesty," Imogen replied, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "I do not choose my origins any more than any of us do. I can only attempt to live with honor, despite them." The Prince laughed, a booming sound that made several courtiers jump. "Well said. Wycliffe, she has spirit. I like that. These milk and water misses bore me to tears. Give me someone with actual substance any day." He turned back to Imogen. "You play, I assume, piano?" "Yes, Your Majesty, and harp. I also sing tolerably well." "Tolerably. False modesty is so tedious. If you sing well, say so. If you do not, admit it honestly. Never apologize for actual accomplishment." He gestured toward the magnificent pianoforte that dominated one corner. "Play something. Something with feeling, not these insipid drawing room pieces everyone performs." It was a command, not a request. Imogen moved to the instrument, her mind racing through her repertoire. The Dowager had prepared her for technical perfection, but the Prince wanted something more. He wanted emotion, passion, the kind of performance that came from genuine feeling rather than mere training. She chose Beethoven, a piece the Dowager had initially forbidden as too intense, too revealing. But if the Prince Regent wanted feeling, she would give it to him. Her fingers found the keys, and she poured into the music everything she had experienced these past months. The terror of that morning in Whitechapel, the disbelief of her rescue, the grueling transformation, the humiliation at the ball, and underneath it all, the growing realization that somewhere in this impossible situation, she had begun to feel something genuine for the man who had saved her. The room fell silent as she played. When the final notes faded, Imogen remained motionless at the piano, suddenly terrified she had overstepped, had revealed too much, had committed some unforgivable breach of propriety. Then the Prince Regent began to applaud, and the entire room followed suit. "Magnificent," he declared, crossing to the pianoforte with surprising energy. "Wycliffe, you have found yourself a treasure." He turned to a skeptical-looking courtier standing nearby, raising his voice to ensure the entire room could hear. "You see, this is precisely what England needs. Fewer ladies raised like delicate porcelain, more women forged in steel. She has substance, Wycliffe. She has survived. That makes her more fit to be a duchess, not less. Any fool can be born to privilege. It takes true quality to rise above adversity with grace intact." The prince's words rang through Carlton House with the weight of royal decree. He turned back to Imogen, his expression surprisingly kind beneath its usual dissolution. "Miss Carstairs, you must perform at my next musicale. I insist. And I expect an invitation to the wedding, naturally." The prince's approval changed everything. If the future king found Imogen acceptable, who would dare contradict him? By the following morning, invitations began arriving again, and those who had snubbed her suddenly remembered prior friendships. The Tun, ever fickle, adjusted its collective opinion with remarkable speed. "Prinny has given you his blessing," the dowager observed with satisfaction. "Cleverly done, child. That performance was inspired." Yet even as London society grudgingly accepted her, Imogen found herself grappling with an entirely different challenge. The 3-month period the Duke had stipulated was approaching its end, and she had no idea what would happen when it arrived. She had fulfilled every requirement. She could walk, talk, dress and behave, as well as any duchess born to the role. She had weathered scandal and emerged intact. She had proven the wager, or rather, the dowager had proven it through her. By all terms of their arrangement, Imogen should prepare to receive her dowry and establish herself independently. Yet the thought of leaving filled her with unexpected anguish. Somewhere during these intense months, she had stopped playing a role and started living it. The Duke's townhouse had become home. The dowager's demanding standards had become a source of pride rather than anxiety. Viscount Ashby's friendship had become precious, and the Duke himself. Imogen forced herself to examine the truth she had been avoiding. She had fallen in love with Lucien Devereux, not with his title or wealth, not with the security he represented, but with the man himself. His unexpected kindness, his dry humor, his genuine concern for those weaker than himself. She loved the way his austere expression softened when he smiled, the careful courtesy with which he treated servants, the fierce protectiveness he showed toward those he considered under his care. But their arrangement had been a business transaction, carefully structured to protect them both. The Duke had never suggested he felt anything beyond responsibility toward her. Indeed, he had maintained appropriate distance throughout, never overstepping, never suggesting their relationship might become more than the facade they presented to society. The end of the 3-month period arrived with the inexorable quality of fate. The Duke requested Imogen's presence in the library, a formal meeting to discuss their arrangement's conclusion. She dressed carefully, as if armor of silk might protect her heart, and descended the stairs with the poise the dowager had instilled. The Duke stood by the window, silhouetted against afternoon light, looking every inch the powerful peer he was. He turned as she entered, and for the first time Imogen noticed that his fingers were clenched in a fist at his side, a small crack in his facade of impeccable control. His expression remained carefully neutral. "Miss Carstairs," he began formally, "our arrangement has reached its specified conclusion. You have exceeded every expectation, fulfilled every requirement. My grandmother admits, privately mind you, that she has never trained anyone so successfully. You are by any measure prepared to be a duchess." "Thank you, Your Grace," Imogen replied, keeping her voice steady. "Therefore, I must ask your intentions. Our engagement was always intended to be temporary, unless you chose otherwise. You are now entirely free to make that choice without pressure or obligation. If you wish to proceed with an actual marriage, I would be honored to fulfill our agreement. If you wish to dissolve the engagement and claim your dowry, I will arrange matters with complete discretion. The decision is entirely yours." It was everything they had agreed to: perfect freedom, no coercion, genuine choice. So why did it feel like her heart was being torn from her chest? "What do you wish, Your Grace?" Imogen asked, unable to accept such a cold conclusion to something that had come to mean so much. The Duke's jaw tightened slightly. "My wishes are irrelevant. You were given no choice in your rescue, no choice in this arrangement. I will not compound that by imposing my preferences now. You must choose based solely on what you desire for your own future. But surely you have some opinion on whether we should marry." "Miss Carstairs—" "Imogen," she interrupted, her careful poise cracking. "My name is Imogen, and we have been living in the same house for 3 months, presenting ourselves as engaged, preparing for a marriage that may or may not occur. I think we have moved beyond such formality." The Duke, Lucien, closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering strength, When he opened them again, something raw and unguarded showed in their grey depths. "Very well, Imogen. You ask what I wish. I wish—" He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself before continuing. "I wish to tell you that this arrangement stopped being a convenient solution to my grandmother's matchmaking approximately 6 weeks ago. I wish to admit that I have come to treasure our conversations, to look forward to seeing you each morning, to feel pride in your accomplishments as if they were my own. I wish to confess that the thought of you leaving, of this house returning to the empty state it held before you arrived, fills me with something approaching despair." Imogen's breath caught. "Lucian, but I also wish," he continued, his voice rough with emotion he could no longer entirely conceal, "to give you genuine freedom to choose your own path. You have been sold, rescued, bargained over, and transformed according to others' wishes. You deserve the opportunity to decide your own fate without any man, even one who has come to care for you deeply, influencing that decision through obligation or gratitude." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Imogen crossed the library slowly, each step deliberate until she stood directly before him, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he maintained even now. "You believe I would choose to marry you out of obligation?" she asked quietly. "After everything, you think so little of my ability to recognize my own heart." "I think," Lucian replied, "that you are 19 years old, that you have experienced extraordinary upheaval, and that you deserve time to understand what you truly want, rather than what circumstances have trained you to accept." "Then you underestimate your own instruction," Imogen said, reaching up to touch his face with a boldness that would have scandalized the dowager. "You taught me to recognize genuine quality of character. You showed me what honor looks like, what kindness means, what strength allows. You rescued me from horror and gave me not just safety, but opportunity, purpose, a future I chose rather than one imposed upon me. And somewhere in the midst of all that, you gave me something else entirely. You gave me your heart, though you tried desperately to hide it." "Imogen." Her name emerged as half prayer, half warning. "I choose you," she said simply. "Not the title, not the wealth, not even the security, though I am practical enough to appreciate those things. I choose the man who intervenes in Whitechapel carriages at dawn, the man who maintains friendships despite social pressures, the man who treats servants with respect and dances with awkward young women at balls when no one else will. I choose Lucian Devereux, and I will be honored to become his Duchess, his wife, and, if Providence is kind, the mother of his children." For a long moment, Lucian simply stared at her, as if unable to believe what he was hearing. Then, with a sound that might have been laughter or relief or both, he pulled her into his arms with a complete disregard for propriety that would have given the dowager an apoplexy. "I love you," he said into her hair, the words emerging with the force of long suppression. "I have tried not to, tried to maintain appropriate distance, tried to give you freedom to choose. But I love you, Imogen Carstairs, with every fiber of my being, and the thought of letting you go was destroying me." "Then do not let me go," Imogen replied, her arms tight around him. "Keep me forever. Make me your Duchess, your wife, your partner in whatever comes, and love me always, as I will love you." They stood together in the library's golden light, holding each other with an intensity that transcended propriety or reason, two people who had found something neither expected in the midst of a practical arrangement: genuine, transformative love. The wedding took place 6 weeks later at Wycliffe Park, the Duke's estate in Yorkshire. Though London society would have expected, demanded even, a grand ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square with hundreds of guests, Lucian and Imogen chose something more intimate. Family and close friends gathered in the estate's ancient chapel, sunlight streaming through medieval stained glass, while a bishop the dowager had known for 40 years performed the ceremony. Imogen wore ivory silk embroidered with silver thread, her hair dressed with pearls that had belonged to Lucian's mother. As she walked down the aisle on Viscount Ashby's arm, he having agreed to stand in for her absent family, she felt no regret, no fear, only a profound sense of rightness. The Duke, Lucian, waited at the altar with an expression of such open happiness that several guests later claimed to have never seen him so transformed. When they spoke their vows, hands clasped, eyes meeting, the chapel seemed to hold its collective breath at the authenticity of feeling being expressed. "I, Lucien Devereux, take thee, Imogen Carstairs, to be my wedded wife," he said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part." Imogen's own vows emerged steady and sure, sealing their union with words that transcended social expectations or practical arrangements. When the bishop pronounced them married, Lucien kissed his bride with a tenderness that made the dowager dab at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. The wedding breakfast that followed featured the Prince Regent as a surprise guest. He had travelled from London specifically to attend, bringing with him a wedding gift of extraordinary value and his official blessing. His presence ensured that any remaining scandal attached to Imogen's name dissolved entirely. Even Lady Arabella, who had married a wealthy merchant in a match her family considered beneath her station, could hardly criticize the Duke's choice when royalty celebrated it. The years that followed brought the kind of happiness Imogen had never imagined possible. She took to her role as Duchess with the same determination that had characterized her transformation, establishing schools for orphaned girls in London, supporting libraries in Yorkshire, and gradually changing perceptions about what a duchess could accomplish. On a crisp autumn morning in 1823, 8 years after her rescue, Imogen visited the Devereux School for Young Ladies in Bloomsbury, the first institution she had founded. Walking through the bright, clean corridors, she paused outside a classroom where a girl of perhaps 14 sat alone during the recreation hour, bent over a book with fierce concentration. The girl's dress was neat, but showed signs of careful mending, her posture rigid with the particular tension of someone afraid to take up too much space in the world. Imogen recognized that posture. She had worn it herself not so long ago. "What are you reading?" Imogen asked gently, entering the room. The girl jumped to her feet, recognizing the Duchess immediately, her curtsy hasty and nervous. "Your Grace, it is merely mathematics. I did not mean to be idle." "Mathematics is never idle," Imogen assured her, gesturing for the girl to sit. "What is your name?" "Sarah Hartley, Your Grace." The girl's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her book. "I am here on scholarship. I do not want to disappoint anyone, but the other girls, they know I do not belong. Do not belong." Imogen sat beside her, her silk skirts rustling softly. "You have a scholarship because you earned it through your own abilities. That is belonging more truly than any accident of birth could provide." Sarah's eyes widened. "But you are a duchess. You were surely born to this." "No," Imogen said quietly. "I was born to poverty and fear. 8 years ago I stood where you stand now, terrified, uncertain, convinced I could never measure up to what was expected of me." She placed her hand gently over the girl's trembling fingers. "That fear you feel, it is not a sign of weakness. It is merely proof that you understand the value of the opportunity before you. Use it as fuel, my dear, not as an anchor. Let it drive you forward, not hold you back." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. "The other girls mock me for studying so hard. They say I am trying too hard, reaching above my station. Then they lack the vision to see what you will become. In 10 years, Sarah Hartley, you will look back at this moment and realize that every hour of study, every moment of discomfort, every instance of proving yourself, all of it shaped you into someone extraordinary, not despite your origins, but because you had the courage to rise above them." The girl looked at the Duchess with something approaching wonder. "Did someone tell you this when you needed to hear it?" Imogen thought of the Dowager's harsh training, the Duke's quiet faith, Nathaniel's loyal defense. "Yes," she said softly, "many people in many ways. And now I am telling you. You belong here, Sarah. Make them see it." As Imogen rose to leave, she glanced back to see the girl sitting straighter, her book open before her with renewed determination. The circle, it seemed, was complete. Their children arrived in steady succession, 3 sons and a daughter, each loved and cherished. The dowager lived to see them all, mellowing with age into something approaching genuine affection for the granddaughter-in-law who had exceeded even her formidable expectations. When she died peacefully at 78, Imogen mourned her sincerely, recognizing that the demanding woman who had transformed her had also, in her way, loved her. London society, ever fickle, eventually forgot that the Duchess of Wycliffe had once been a clerk's daughter, rescued from a brothel-bound carriage. New scandals replaced old ones, and Imogen's origins became merely an interesting footnote in her story, rather than its defining feature. She was simply the Duchess, elegant, accomplished, dedicated to improving the lives of those less fortunate. At a musicale in 1825, 10 years after her rescue, Imogen found herself across the room from Lady Arabella, now Mrs. Pemberton, wife to a wealthy textile merchant. Their eyes met briefly, and Imogen offered a courteous nod of acknowledgement. Lady Arabella returned it with mechanical precision, but something in her expression, a tightness around the mouth, a weariness in the eyes, spoke of a life lived without joy. Her gown was expensive, her jewels genuine, but she wore them with the air of someone performing a duty rather than celebrating good fortune. Beside her, Mr. Pemberton spoke animatedly with associates about profit margins, oblivious to his wife's barely concealed boredom. Imogen turned away, feeling not triumph, but a genuine sadness for the woman who had once viewed her with such contempt. Lady Arabella had everything money could buy, yet seemed to possess nothing that truly mattered. Meanwhile, Imogen, once sold for £30, had found a love that transformed lives, a purpose that brought meaning, and a happiness that no amount of wealth could purchase. But Imogen never forgot. Every girl she helped educate, every orphan she supported, every woman she assisted in finding respectable employment, each one represented the girl she had been, the fate she had narrowly escaped, the transformation that genuine care and opportunity could effect. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucian asked her one autumn evening as they walked through Wycliffe Park's gardens. 20 years had passed since that morning in Whitechapel, and they had grown middle-aged together, silver threading through Imogen's auburn hair, lines forming around Lucian's eyes. "Regret what?" Imogen asked, knowing full well what he meant, but wanting to hear him say it. "Any of it. The bargain, the transformation, marrying a man you barely knew under such extraordinary circumstances." Imogen stopped beneath an ancient oak, turning to face her husband with a smile. "I regret nothing. Not the fear, not the difficulty, not even that terrible ball where my mother appeared. Every moment led to this, to you, to our children, to the life we have built together. You rescued me, yes, but you gave me something far greater than mere safety. You gave me the chance to discover who I could become. And who have you become, my love?" "Myself," Imogen replied simply. "Fully, completely, authentically myself. That is the greatest gift anyone could receive." They stood together in the fading light, two people who had defied every expectation, proven every cynic wrong, and built something lasting from the most unlikely beginnings. Love, it seemed, truly could conquer any obstacle, even the insurmountable barriers of class, the cruelty of fate, and the harsh judgments of society. And that, in the end, was the only truth that mattered. 5 decades later, in the same gardens where they had walked countless times, the Duke and Duchess of Wycliffe sat together watching their grandchildren play. Imogen's hair had turned completely silver, and Lucian's back had curved with age, but their hands remained clasped as they had been that day in the library when everything changed. "We have had a good life," Lucian said quietly. "We have had an extraordinary life," Imogen corrected. "Against all odds, despite all obstacles, we found each other. We built something beautiful." Their children had grown to adulthood, each choosing love over obligation in their own marriages, a legacy Imogen and Lucian had deliberately fostered. The schools Imogen had established continued to educate hundreds of girls annually. The foundation bearing her name had become one of London's most respected charitable organizations. As sunset painted the Yorkshire sky in shades of amber and gold, Imogen leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling the profound contentment of a life well lived, of love well earned. "Thank you," she whispered, "for rescuing me, for believing in me, for loving me." "Thank you," Lucienne replied, kissing her silver hair, "for choosing me, for transforming not just yourself, but all of us, for proving that true nobility comes from character, not birth." They sat together as twilight deepened, two souls who had found each other in the most impossible circumstances and built something that would endure long after they were gone. A legacy of love, courage, and the unshakable belief that every person, regardless of origin, deserves the chance to discover their own greatness. The end. Dear listener, sometimes the cruelest circumstances lead to the most extraordinary transformations. Like Imogen, you may find yourself facing impossible situations, feeling powerless, believing your story has already been written by others' choices. But remember, rescue can come from unexpected places, and within you lies the capacity to become more than anyone, including yourself, ever imagined. Your past does not define your future. The circumstances of your birth, the failures of those who should have protected you, the judgments of those who claim to know your worth, none of these things limit what you can achieve when given opportunity and support. Imogen was sold by her own mother, yet she became a duchess who changed the lives of thousands. Your journey may be different, but the principle remains the same. Courage, determination, and genuine love can overcome any obstacle. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, know that you are capable of extraordinary transformation. You are worthy of rescue, of love, of every good thing life can offer. The bargains others have made on your behalf need not bind you forever. Your true story is still being written, and you hold the pen. Thank you for journeying with us through Imogen and Lucien's remarkable story. If tales of courage, transformation, and love that defies all expectations touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your support allows us to continue creating stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us all of the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit.